Megidi moin, liebe SEO Presso Podcast-Freunde. Na, genug Tipps aus Podcast gehört? Dann geht's jetzt in die konkrete Umsetzung. Wie? Du weißt nicht, wo du anfangen und wie priorisieren sollst? Kein Ding. Christian B. Schmidt von Digital Effects bietet dir einen gratis SEO-Check unter digitaleffects.de/SEOpresso. In einem persönlichen Videocall gibt Christian dir dann konkrete SEO-Tipps gratis und unverbindlich, ein absoluter Ehrenmann. Also, bewirb dich jetzt unter digitaleffects.de/SEOpresso. Hello and welcome to another English episode of the SEO Presso podcast. My name is Björn Darko and today's guest is Tyson Stockton, co-founder of Previsible.io and co-host of the most successful SEO podcast in the US, The Voices of Search. Tyson has previously worked as VP at Searchmetrics, where he was heading the professional services of the US business. He started his career as a search and marketing manager at Sports Warehouse. Hi, Tyson. Good to have you on the podcast again.
What's going on, Bjorn? Always good to be back.
Yeah. And I said it in the beginning, is it right that the Voices of Search is the most successful podcast when it comes to SEO in the US?
I believe so. I mean, I haven't been tracking as closely compared to the other ones, but I mean, we've hit a top 4 on the Apple charts for business, like general business podcasts. So yeah, we've been doing it now for, I want to say, over 4 years. And yeah, I have a pretty solid following.
Nice one. Congratulations. And it is a really good podcast. If you people are interested, tune in on, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you find good podcasts, The Voices of Search. But our topic today is actually hiring SEOs. You at Previsible, you hire SEOs for other companies to place them and source talents for different companies, right? How can we imagine that? Does it work? Is it kind of a headhunting, channel within the agency? So you place them there and then you get kind of a stake on their annual salary. Can you elaborate a bit on how that works?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, first, just going back to if there are any, listeners to this podcast that have interest or, past guests that you've had on that would have an interest in being on Voices of Search, feel free to give me a shout. We're always looking to have good guests on the podcast. And then, yeah, as far as what we offer at Previsible, I'll first kind of just frame up like our business. We have 3 main channels or areas of service. We have our SEO consulting, our recruiting or resourcing, and then our enablement and education. And so whether businesses are needing to have that external expertise come in, that's where our consulting arm plays. If it's expanding, bringing on new talent to their team, we do that with our resourcing, and then the education enablement to whether progress individuals within an SEO team or partners delivering on SEO. That's more of how do we become more effective or more efficient in our craft. And within resourcing, we offer kind of 3 types of service. We have one, which is the more traditional recruiting and retain search. And so that's when a business wants to bring on an SEO. And really, this came out of hearing from clients and also just past struggles myself of working with external or internal recruiting teams, where if you don't have the understanding of SEO and the experience directly working within it, it becomes really difficult to really evaluate and assess quality talent. And you can look at 2 people on paper, hey, they both have 5 years of experience, but then it may not be the exact fit. And there's so many different types of SEOs. And so with this, we're really working with the teams of understanding what are the needs, what are they looking to achieve, what's the composition of their existing team. And then we create for them more of the persona or profile of who we need to look for, and then help with the outreach using our network of SEOs, using our SEO jobs newsletter, and then finding those individuals, doing the screens, doing skills assessments, and then ultimately passing over our top, 3 to 5 candidates that we feel are most suited or most qualified for the position. We're also starting to get into a few new areas within resourcing, and this is coming from a lot of the tech layoffs and what we're seeing in the market. We're seeing more and more businesses look for contractors. So if a company doesn't have the headcount to bring on a full-time employee, we can actually bring on someone to the Previsible team and then have them as a contractor to our client. And so they're paying, instead of the overhead and everything else that goes along with the employee, they're just paying us a contractor fee to have that person fully dedicated to their business and work as an extension of their brand. And then our final area is kind of in dedicated consulting, which is very similar, but in addition to just getting a full dedicated contractor, you also have the backing of the Previsible leadership team, the support team, and everything else that we offer. And this way we feel like we have 3 different options from, hey, we just need someone to ensure that we make the right SEO hire and find the right SEO for us, finding that contractor and having that resourcing model, or a full-blown dedicated consultant that has the backing and the management of Previsible.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me in some points to what is also happening within product and technology, or product and engineering, right? So the second thing that you described is kind of offshoring, right? So they're employed with you, and you just place them for a certain amount of time, contractual within this company, right? And the third one with the consultant, I mean, that's pretty normal also within agencies in Germany. But I, to be honest, haven't seen any kind of agency within Germany or even within Europe that does kind of headhunting for talents for companies. And I think it do make sense, right? Because if you talk to normal headhunting companies, they hire for, a lot of subjects and a lot of topics, but really having the dedicated experience with SEO and what actually the company is needed in kind of skill sets, also personality characteristics of that specific person. I think it totally makes sense that an agency with a vast SEO background does the sourcing and also the pre-filtering and pre-selection of those candidates. So what is it like if you look at the pattern? So of course you can hire a specialist or more a managerial role, a visionary role, right? But what is kind of the pattern of what companies are looking for nowadays? Is it more the specialist, or is it more somebody that can drive leadership and drive vision within the company?
There's a pretty broad array. Like we're seeing now, at least within the US market, more SEO leadership opportunities opening back up, especially in the enterprise level. So we're seeing those director level and above roles starting to now be kind of, and maybe it was with some of the uncertainty in the market, they were just holding back on opening those headcounts. And so we are seeing those. I think that's a key area that businesses sometimes struggle with, is like the management or like leadership level of SEO. There's a lot of super talented SEOs that are really technical and really skilled, but they may struggle a little bit more with the management or the soft skill side. So finding those individuals that have like the technical chops and the soft skills for management and navigation around an organization is an area that we see a little bit more challenging. Otherwise, like definitely the mid to senior level SEOs in like the manager, like SEO manager, senior manager area have been pretty common. To date, we've probably done less entry level placements. Like we have had a few that we've worked with companies on placing a 1 to 3 year experience SEO specialist or associate to join a team. Those typically we find come from frustrations of pace and how long it's taking, whether traditional agencies or internal recruiting teams to bring on like quality, entry level talent. But those, certainly exist as well. I think at least US market wise, what we're seeing now is like this increase in interest for contractors where they may not, again, have a full-time headcount available yet. And so in those scenarios, that's where we want to be able to offer that, assuming that the individual and the company and everything's a fit, if they eventually want to convert that person to be a full-time, we're certainly open to that. We just, obviously want to make sure it's within the individual's interest and everyone's kind of happy with the arrangement.
Right. And how do you, like, from your side, assess the knowledge of the candidate? Because we all know it, right? So there's, a hiring manager is coming, you have one interview and talking to the talent acquisition manager, then most probably will, transfer to your hiring manager. And most of the time there's kind of a case study, which is for SEOs that work a longer time within the SEO area, actually a very easy case, right? But to really get to the knowledge of the specific person with the background of what the company's needed, how do you assess the knowledge of that person and that candidate?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's one area that I strongly believe there should not be a one size fits all, because the needs of each role is going to be a little bit different. So I do advocate and do use customized skills assessments where it's like I have a few, fundamental kind of basic like questions that I might use like multiple times, but I'll really put like a unique touch to each skills assessment to make sure it's catered to the expectations of that role. But typically our process for interviewing or for the entire recruiting piece is one, like at the early stages, you're more generous. Like you're much more like, you don't want to be overly critical because, it's like a resume is a good representation of someone's work, but I don't think it's a foolproof, like, hey, I can tell everything just by a piece of paper. And so first step is, just doing application screenings, looking at their background, being like, could this person be a fit? If there's, enough evidence to be like, this person could be, they'll move into a phone screen. The phone screen again is just like, okay, how well can they speak of it? Do we get the sense that like what we saw on the resume is accurate, is represented? Like, do they meet some of the basic requirements for the role? And then we go into a second round interview and that's where typically myself, Jordan, like someone else is jumping in. And that's where we're having a more in-depth conversation about the past projects and work that they've done within SEO. And so it's not just looking for the hard skills, but it's like, how well can they explain, articulate? Did they talk about how they were able to overcome challenges, get things through an organization or work with different teams? And then the final kind of stage or step on our side before we would make a recommendation would be that skills assessment. The more entry level the position, the quicker and faster it is. So I might use more of a Google Forms sheet for an entry level position with a couple like trivial questions, a little bit more long form that they can't just, do a Google search and get it. I'll ask for more of like application of something that they might easily be able to find online. And then more for the mid-senior to leadership positions is typically a scenario-based assessment. And we recently helped a investment company hire an SEO manager to basically work with their portfolio company on SEO. And so for that, it was a little unique that it's not just being an in-house SEO, or it's not just being an SEO at an agency, but you're kind of having elements of both. And so for that, it was assessing not just, hey, how well can you assess SEO opportunities or identify issues to be fixed, but also how can you talk to founders and CEOs? How can you advise the investment company on the opportunity of a potential acquisition target? And so again, at each stage, you're kind of taking in unique characteristics of the role and then using that to get more and more critical as you go deeper into the interviewing process to ultimately make that recommendation to someone that we're working with is, hey, based on our outreach, based on our interviews, based on all these steps, these are the individuals that we think are the most qualified for the specific role.
You also mentioned the CV. Like, it is actually the first starting point for each and every candidate, right? So like when you get a CV or a resume, maybe you can give tips to the listeners. What is, for you and also for companies, a must have within the CV? How should a CV be structured, and what should, contain a CV so that it is really, really attractive for you?
Yeah. And I think on this one, actually, I'm not as traditional as a lot of people on it. Like, I don't care as much about general aesthetics and like, yeah, I want it to look good and clear, but it's like the most important thing that I'm going through is directly on work experience. Like, I don't spend as much time looking at past education. Like, I look that there was a university, whether it's a bachelor's or a master's for it. I don't really care as much about what the performance was in college. It's just more of a checkbox, like, great, they went to an accredited university. But I'm mainly looking at what was the work experience and looking at what details they put on it. So it's not just, hey, did they work for a big household name that everyone knows or a big corporation? It's how did they talk about the work? Did they actually call out specific achievements that they made? Like, what was the day to day? And we all know within SEO, there's so many different aspects and facets where you could have some SEOs that are working with product engineering teams and other SEOs that sit within marketing and work with content teams and, more analytics teams. And so I want to see what are the projects, what are the successes, how long you were at a company, things like that. And that's going to hold the most weight for me. The recommendations I would have on people is be specific of your achievements and your work in each role. Like, don't just list the title and the company name. Another thing that I don't think the individuals can like directly control or just go to their CV and make changes to. But another thing that I really like to see is typically progression within a company. They didn't just stay at each company for 5-8 months and move on to another role. Like, seeing that they spent a significant amount of time somewhere, seeing that they maybe took 1 or 2 different positions within the same company. Those are usually really strong signs of like, hey, this company saw something in them that they were willing to promote them and move them up. And that's something that I think also holds a bit of weight because, again, it just shows a little bit more of the character in the individual than necessarily what school they went to or just, how big of a company they worked for.
What I also found, like based on my experience, maybe I'm a special person, but when you go on conferences, and I also do this podcast, for example, right? I go on conferences, I write in magazines and blogs, and I give interviews. I always list those things also within my CV because I believe that it gives like a sense of my personal brand, and it gives also a sense of my ability to be also a thought leader within the industry, and most probably also will increase the market value and the perception of the one who's reading the CV, and most probably you get far better chances to get invited for an interview, right?
100%. Like that, any sort of extracurriculars, like yours are great examples. Like they're in the same lane of work, but even if you have other like volunteering experiences, anything that can set you apart as being a little more unique, a little different is a huge positive. And I'd say like in general, you want your character, your personality to come out a little bit on that CV. And you only can take it so far, but even if it's enough to get that first conversation, like that's where then you have the opportunity to really do it. Like a lot of SEOs that I talk to, it's like oftentimes getting past that first CV scan is the hardest part. And it's also part of the reason too that, we get a lot of applicants when we're working on different positions, but I do want to give people the opportunity to at least have that first phone conversation because, you never want to miss something. And it's like the thing that I keep reminding myself in working on this is not just a piece of paper. Like it's a person on the other side of that. Like maybe this opportunity can make a huge difference for them. So it's like, it doesn't mean like if you're looking for a new job, like you don't have to worry about making your CV look nice. Like by all means, you should do everything you can to make it look good. But you're on the hiring end too. Remind yourself that, hey, it's like these are people and you might be surprised. And sometimes, there'll be a really, really good resume. I get them on the phone not as good. And so it's like, just keep that in mind and keep a balance within that.
Often it's also written in a job description that somebody should have a proven track record, right? So that they need to prove what they have already done within previous companies, right? So how do you get to this point that you actually get a sense of what their ability is and what they have done in order to scale or develop a business in general?
And that's another good one. And I guess before I get into that, what that reminded me too, don't be afraid to make changes to your CV. Like, you shouldn't just have one CV that you send to every single job posting. Look at the job posting and then see what you can call out within your past experience on what they're looking for. And so when you have those 3 to 5 bullet points or summary of the work you did at whatever position, use that as an opportunity to call out the things that they've already written in the job description to then make that association present. I think then the next piece, and kind of also like from your question, is how do you portray that on the phone interview? Like, every question you get, like, of course you want to answer that question as directly as possible, but also look for opportunities to bring up examples of the qualifications or responsibilities they're looking for. If they ask you about your past job and you see that one of the top responsibilities is something that you did, talk about that, talk about the success or the actual hard numbers of what was derived from it. And that is going to, again, just make them feel that much more confident that you're an individual that can fit the needs of what they're looking for.
I mean, the elephant in the room, right? When you do the discussion and you've gone through the process, right? And people ask you about your salary, right? You know, it's the elephant in the room. And I know people make up their mind, okay, what do I expect actually to have? Most of the people want to also jump from the current salary to a new one. And companies kind of use a trick all the time when they ask, okay, what's your current salary, right? So in order to, say, what do you expect, right? Would you say that you should lie on this question and say, put 20% up on it so that you get to the amount that you actually have, because there's still wiggle room and negotiation happening. But what kind of the tips do you have to actually get to your expected salary at the end of the day?
That's a great question. And again, you're going to talk to people and get different answers for it. For me personally, I would never recommend lying about it, but I wouldn't leave it as just saying, hey, I made this in my past role, because you run potential risk of, if they do the background checks, like, it could come out, and that could be a really tricky position to be in. But it is this cat and mouse game of the conversations. I always like to ask that question of, what are your salary expectations instead of what's your current salary? Because I think that gives me better line of what the individual is looking for. And if they're looking for something that's drastically far off than what I'm able to provide in that role, I don't want to waste their time. I don't want to go through a disappointment of recommending someone as a candidate that then won't work out because they're too far off on compensation. So I think as the person hiring, I also like to be as transparent as possible and provide an accurate pay band. And it's like, sure, there may be wiggle room, and there's cases when I've gone beyond the pay band because the individual was such a great candidate. But one, from the employer side, put a pay band on it. Just be transparent so people know what they're interviewing for. And that's going to help you in ensuring that you're getting candidates that fit in the same realm of what you're looking for. For the candidates and the people looking for the job, it's a tricky one, because like, a lot of times in these conversations, it's almost like you're in a negotiation, and there's value not to be the first one to say a number. Like, you want the employer to say a number first before you do, because it puts you in a better position of kind of control in the negotiation process. And that was something like one of my early managers explained to me, not even in relation to like salary, but just general negotiation. And he was doing negotiations with, Nike and Adidas and Wilson and whoever else. And always he would say a thing and then wait for them to do it. And so there's some tact in that, like, you don't always want to be the first one to say a number. I think from people that I interview, when I ask them the question, and again, this is a scenario that the comp band is posted on the job description, so I know that they've seen it, but I still am asking them, hey, what are your expectations for salary? The individuals that say just like, yeah, it's within the range that you posted, to me, that's enough of a green light to be like, okay, I can move them forward, but it doesn't give me like any sort of leverage or something. Like if the pay band is between, I don't know, 75 and 100,000. And then someone's like, yeah, no, I'm really hoping for 75. Like kind of already sets them at a disadvantage in the negotiation process, where if they just said, yeah, I'm within the range that was posted, it gives me enough to be like, cool, that is, someone that we can move forward in the process, but it doesn't put them at like a disadvantage to it. I think too, especially if you feel like you are slightly overqualified, or it's like through the process, you're like, yeah, I have a lot of confidence that I am the best candidate for this. It's also okay to try to stretch it. And I think the less detail that you get into in the beginning of the process allows you to really win over them as being like, this is the person that we want. And then if you're asking for a little bit more than what that pay band was, then that can give you enough like leverage to get something beyond what you were initially asking for. The other kind of final piece on comp is there are the other elements that are not necessarily salary. So those are always like good for both sides to bring up. What's the PTO situation? What are the benefits of it? Is there equity opportunities? Like those are all things too that can kind of swing. Is it remote? Is it in office? Like those are the details. And personally too, if I'm the individual would be interviewing for something, I'm going to start with those before I want to talk about actual like salary, because that's like kind of, you get those ones that they're going to use as leverage later on. And they're going to use those elements to try to swing you into taking a lower comp. So you get squared away on those first. Now you can just focus on what's, the monthly salary that you're going to be expecting from the position.
Last question, Tyson, that I have. So we went through kind of how you determine whether the SEO candidate will be a good fit for the company, looking at their skill sets, looking at their way to communicate, if they're cultural fit, and also their kind of problem solving abilities. Are there any kind of red flags or warning signs that you look at out during the hiring process, even if the candidate is really good from the background and skill set and experience and stuff? But are there any kind of red flags and warning signs that could potentially block you to hire those persons?
Yeah, and this would be one that's hard to articulate into like this is always what it's going to be, because like things like company culture can be so unique from one company to another. And if I'm hiring and I'm inside a company, like say like I'm the SEO manager and I'm bringing on, or I'm the director of SEO for some larger company and I'm bringing on an SEO manager, well, one thing I'll do is I'll probably ask one of the key stakeholders in another department that role is going to have to work with. And I'm going to bring them into the conversation and the interview process just to make sure that those individuals can connect and they get a good feeling from each other. From the outsider, I want to talk to as many people in a company when I'm going to help recruit for them, because I want to understand their culture as best I can as an outsider. So I don't just want to talk to the hiring manager. I maybe want to talk to a colleague of this person, talk to someone else in another department, get as much feel as I can. And then it's in the conversation, you just pick up on a little bit of that intuition, like how well does the person articulate about SEO? Like if they're in a position that has to work with a lot of engineering teams, do I get the feeling that this individual can speak and be effective in working with engineers? If the person is working with content teams, can they talk about SEO in a non-technical way? Can they talk about past work in a way that's very approachable and easy to understand? And so it's very situational in these cases. I think in general, like the characteristics that I'm looking for is someone that's eager, they want to develop and grow, they're humble, but also like ambitious. And if someone's coming in that's like overly arrogant, or they think a lot of stuff is beneath them, that's typically going to be something that just personally for me is not going to resonate as well, because typically I want someone that is going to come in and is ambitious and hungry, but they're also humble enough to know that they have to work with other individuals. And it's not just like, I'm the smartest guy in the room, so everybody should listen to me. Most of the time, that's not going to work in the business world. So it's like, you really want to see, like, is this someone that can succeed on the soft skills within SEO and not just the hard skills? And that could be also something that's a little more heightened in US business culture. There are nuances and differences to SEOs in Germany or LATAM or the US. Like I've realized you get a little bit of a uniqueness, like depending on the market and depending on the company culture and businesses in general.
I think that were some great insights. If one of the listeners is a hiring manager or, running a company, start thinking about hiring the first SEO. Thanks for sharing this. You've read through a lot of CVs and have been in touch with a lot of candidates. So I think that's super, super helpful. Thanks for being on the podcast, Tyson. Happy to have you again next time. And thank you for tuning in. We see and hear us next week again. Ciao.